It's unprecedented. The January 6th committee subpoenaing 5 sitting lawmakers for the first time. That is a huge deal. Lawmakers rarely subpoena their own colleagues, including GOP leader Kevin McCarthy, compelling them to sit for depositions by the end of the month. McCarthy, who was caught on tape talking about kicking Trump out of office, infamously ran to Mar-a-Lago weeks later. Chairman Benny Thompson writing, quote, "You declined voluntary cooperation, and we are left with no choice but to issue you this subpoena." In a letter sent asking for his cooperation in January, the committee said they wanted to talk to McCarthy about his, quote, "conversations with President Trump before, during, and after the violent January 6th attack." McCarthy today slamming the committee's probe.
I have not seen the subpoena. I guess they sent it to you guys before they sent it to me. Look, my view on the committee has not changed. They're not conducting a legitimate investigation. It seems as though they just want to go after their political opponents.
Congressman Scott Perry having a similar reaction today.
The fact that they send it to the press before they send it to the members just proves it's all about headlines. This whole thing's a charade.
Committee Chairman Benny Thompson today saying he hopes they all comply, and so far there have not been conversations about contempt if they don't. January 6th committee member Jamie Raskin today emphasizing the unprecedented nature of January 6th when asked about the decision to subpoena fellow lawmakers.
Well, an attempted coup and a violent insurrection at the Capitol interrupting the peaceful transfer of power are unprecedented events. They should come in and testify voluntarily. And if they don't, then all of us should come to expect that they could be subpoenaed for it.
Joining me now, former acting U.S. Solicitor General Neal Katyal and former federal prosecutor Barbara McQuade. Neal, the three of us have sat here many times asking, will they, won't they? They have your reaction to these subpoenas.
I'm so glad to see Congress doing this. They gave these members of Congress the choice to come in voluntarily back as early as January. They all refused. And so now what are they saying? Well, they're saying, oh, this is about headlines and anti-Trump. I mean, you know, there are a lot of anti-Trump people that the Congressional Committee could have subpoenaed. They could have subpoenaed Marjorie Taylor Greene or Matt Gaetz or any number of kind of people like that. They didn't. This is not 5 random people. These are 5 material witnesses, and the committee has said in their letters that they have evidence that Mark Meadows was being plotted with these members of Congress, that these members of Congress were plotting with Ali Alexander and others as well, like Jeffrey Clark, trying to maneuver for him to be acting attorney general and boot out the old attorney general, Jeffrey Rosen, who wasn't doing Trump's bidding. So all of this is really important information. You know, I'm a little upset it's taken this long to get to the subpoena, but I'm really, really glad to see Congress doing this today.
And we'll talk in a minute about how time is of the essence here. But Barbara, talk to me about the significance of the committee subpoenaing their own colleagues.
Well, as you heard Representative Raskin say there, it's unprecedented. Calling a member of their own before the committee with a subpoena, not a voluntary sit down, but a subpoena, is unprecedented. But you know what else is unprecedented? An attempt to attack the Capitol and stop the peaceful transfer of power. And so for that reason, the stakes are high, and calling them in with a subpoena, I think, is absolutely appropriate under these circumstances. Some interesting things about their compliance. You know, will they comply, or do they go after the legitimacy of the committee, as we are hearing some of them do? You know, the tables are going to be turned one of these days, and they may want to subpoena other members of Congress. And so they need to think carefully about whether they harm the institution. The other things they can't rely on here, as some of the other witnesses have, there is no attorney-client privilege at issue here. There is no executive privilege at issue here. This really is a question of people who have evidence and need to produce it to the committee that is legitimately investigating a very serious matter.
Neal, I fully take Barb's point. I also want to point out, though, these Republicans have shown little concern for institutions, right? If that is supposed to be the driving, motivating factor for them to comply, they haven't exactly shown a history of making that a priority.
That's 100% right, and they've also not respected precedent at all. And Barbara has been absolutely brilliant in making the case for the crimes that were committed on January 6th. She wrote essentially a prosecution memo about this. The one thing I would just quibble with her on this is that there is actually precedent. The ethics committees have subpoenaed members of Congress before, and some of them have even gone to court. So we have seen this, a member of congressional committee subpoenaing a member of Congress. She's absolutely right. Given their their disregard of institutions and their coup-like behavior, I expect them to fight this. And so the Congress has two tools available to it. One is the criminal contempt statute, which has been around since 1857 and allows them to say to the Justice Department, look, we need this information. You need to put these people in jail until they give it to us. The other is that Congress itself can file a civil lawsuit in Washington, D.C. to get at this information. Either way, the congressional committees, if this does go to court, I'm quite sure will prevail. There's an obvious need for this information. The arguments on the other side are bogus. There's really two. One, the members of Congress are saying they have a right to privacy, which is particularly ironic because I haven't seen them exactly, protesting over the last week on the Supreme Court steps. But I guess they think men in Congress have a right to privacy and the rest of us don't. And then the second thing that they will say is speech or debate immunity. That's a clause in the Constitution which says in general members of Congress have immunity while on the floor. But that's got to be a legislative act. And plotting a coup or refusing to answer questions under oath is not exactly a legislative act.
Barbara, as Neil just said, you have brilliantly laid all of this out. So in the spirit of asking you to do that once again, what does the committee want to learn from these depositions?
Well, unlike a criminal prosecution, what the committee really is trying to learn here is everything that happened. They are trying to chronicle the facts in the same way that the September 11th committee put together that extensive report and then used it as a way to guide legislation to fill in gaps in the law. In the same way, this committee has been charged with figuring out what happened. And an essential part of that story is figuring out what these 5 members of Congress were doing and saying as this attack was occurring. We know several of them were talking with President Trump while things were occurring. We know that at least one of them, reports say, was seeking pardons for some of the people who might be involved in the attacks. And so it's very important to understand what they were saying, when they were saying it, what they were aware of Donald Trump was saying to help put this whole story together. And one other thing, I wonder Neil's thoughts on this. We talked about contempt power with a criminal prosecution or a civil case. I think this is the one place where there may be some congressional inherent contempt power. We've seen this sort of power just slip away and not be used. But when it is members of Congress who are subject to that subpoena, the committee has some powers to recommend censure and other kinds of things against its own members that's unique to its members and different from all of these other witnesses who have been flouting subpoenas.
Neil, Barbara wants your thoughts, and so do I.
That's exactly right. Barbara's right. So there's an inherent contempt power. It goes all the way back to the founding of the Constitution. It's been upheld by the Supreme Court. It's so extensive, it even allows members of Congress to jail someone. There's a jail in the Capitol that could be used for this. And Barbara's right to say there's also steps short of that, from censure or stripping committee assignments or even docking their pay. There's a bunch of different options. And I think the problem for these 5 members of Congress, when they go and attack this subpoena and say it's about headlines or something, I think Barbara's isolated the important question, which is, what would these 5 members of Congress want an investigation to do? A committee charged with trying to get the truth of January 6th? Of course you'd need to know what these 5 people were doing and what they said and who they said it to. They were material witnesses. It would be a bogus investigation if they couldn't get at this information. That's why I think whether it's inherent contempt or whether it's a court case or whatever, these folks are going to get the information that they need to get.
Barbara, I want you to take a listen to what committee member Congressman Schiff said today.
These members clearly have relevant information for the committee and for the country, and they took an oath to uphold the Constitution. This is part of upholding the oath.
Here's the thing, Barbara. There's an argument that Democrats know they have to make to the American people that counters this idea of what you're going to hear from Republicans about how this is all bogus. And that's it right there, right? You had Congressman Schiff laying out exactly what Neil laid out. They have information. We just want to hear it. Why should that be so complicated?
Yeah, I think sometimes we see cynical politicians and others talk in terms of sound bites, counting on the fact that members of the public are too busy to pay attention to the details. And so if they simply say things like they're going after us because they're going after their political opponents, they take this very high level argument, then many people won't listen to the details. But I think that's why it's so critically important to get them to testify, because it's always the facts that matter. What was said? You know, you can paint in all these broad brushes about motives and other kinds of things all day long. But at the end of the day, this is about facts. And the only way we're going to learn those facts is by bringing them into the committee room and putting them under oath and asking them.
Neil, Congressman Jim Jordan has historically dodged questions about when he talked to Trump on January 6th. Take a listen.
Did you talk to the former president that day?
I've talked to the former president umpteen times.
I mean, on January 6th, Congressman.
Yes, I mean, I've talked to the president. I've talked to the president so many. I can't remember all the days I've talked to him, but I've certainly talked to the president.
Did you speak with him before, during, or after the Capitol was attacked?
I'd have to go. I spoke with him that day after. I think after. I don't know if I spoke with him in the morning or not. I just don't know.
So, Neil, I subject you to that footage to ask you if the committee will be able to get the truth if he's deposed. Or are we going to have more of that game of whack-a-mole?
Well, you know, you can't watch that testimony and think that this guy's credible in any particular way. I mean, it's just a not convincing performance. He can't keep his, his misstatements and lies straight. So, I expect more of that. But I think, Alicia, the hard thing is like, for them is at some point, like they've got, they keep on saying we're afraid to testify, and they keep on, slinging mud at the committee or this and that. But the bottom line is that they just never want to actually go in under oath and tell the truth. That's the thing they're afraid of. And, my suspicion is for a good reason, because, the Jim Jordans of the world and others were involved in all this stuff, and they're afraid of it all coming out. But the committee has the powers and have today taken the most important step in trying to get that information to the American people.